What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by the channel. Today's project is this Weed Eater brand blower, and the problem is that it will not start. Let's take a good look at it, find out what's wrong with it, and hopefully we can fix it. In this video, we try and repair this blower. However, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. Now, I'll be the first to admit it, this is not a serious blower. It's meant to blow grass clippings and leaves off your porch. I would never consider using it to move leaves around the yard in winter, as it simply doesn't move enough air to be effective. Now, we don't have any real information on this blower, which is the way I prefer it. That way we don't have any conflicting information to worry about, only the facts in front of us. Now, if we take a look inside the fuel tank, there's no fuel in it. That means we won't be able to figure out if it was the reason why this engine wouldn't start. The other thing that I see is a fuel filter that's not connected to the fuel line. That means we'll have to replace the fuel lines and inspect the carb for any dirt that might be clogging the inlet screen. If we take a closer look at the fuel filter, the metal is beginning to corrode on the weighted end. That means the inside of the filter is probably the same way, so we won't be able to reuse it and we'll have to replace it. Next, I want to check to see if the engine is worn out. The easiest way for me to do that is to slowly pull on the rope and feel how much the engine is fighting back. As you can see, the engine is fighting back extremely well. That means this engine should have more than enough compression to start and run. If yours is easy to pull, then the piston rings might be severely damaged and the engine might not start. Now that we know that the engine is not worn out, I want to check for a working ignition system. For that, I like to use my spark checker. You can find these online for just a few dollars, and to use it, install it in line with the spark plug, pull the rope a few times, and watch for an orange glow in the tester. Now, this engine does not have a kill switch, but if yours has one, make sure it's in the on position. I know it can be kind of hard to see the orange glow in the tester, especially outdoors, so I stopped the video. That way you can see that we do have a working ignition system, which is great news. If you don't see a glow in your tester, you might have a bad kill switch or a bad ignition coil. The next thing I want to do is use a compression tester to get an actual reading from the engine. I know that we confirmed that we had some compression earlier, but this will give us a visible reading. Now, you can find these online for less than $20, and to use it, install it into the spark plug hole and pull the rope several times. We want to see a reading well over 100 psi, and we do not want to see a reading below 50. So the reading is 125 psi, which isn't bad at all. It means that this engine is healthy and should work quite well. I would have liked the number closer to 150, but at least I know the engine isn't worn out. The next thing I want to do is put some fuel into the engine through the spark plug hole, replace the spark plug and the boot, and try starting it. We also seem to have a problem with the rope not always retracting, but we'll deal with that another day. So the engine started and ran for a few seconds, which is great news. That means that the engine is in working condition, and we can now move on to the carburetor and the fuel system. After taking off the pumping section, we can see a sticky brown oil inside the carburetor, which isn't a big issue. What's more important are that these two check valve flaps are flat and parallel with the rest of the diaphragm. It's easier to see if you look at it from the side. Now, this one is good, so we can reuse it. If yours are bent, I would suggest just replacing the carburetor. Next, I want to check to make sure that the inlet screen is clear of any dirt or debris. Now, we do have some dirt on our screen, but we'll clean that off only after the needle and rocker arm have been removed from the other side of the carburetor. Now, to get to them, we'll need to remove this metal plate, and after inspecting the metering diaphragm, we can then finally remove the needle and rocker arm. So the metering diaphragm isn't completely petrified, but it's definitely beginning to harden up. There are also a couple of wrinkles in it, so we need to remove it and replace it. Now, when taking off the rocker arm and needle, you need to be extremely careful, as these parts are very small and easy to lose, especially the spring. If you lose any one of these small parts, you might as well buy a replacement carburetor. Now, when spraying carb cleaner on the screen, make sure that the cleaner passes through the screen. Sometimes old fuel will turn into varnish that will clog the screen's small holes, and if the carb cleaner isn't disappearing through the screen, remove the screen and soak it in a container of carb cleaner and then reinstall it. Even though the cleaner was passing through our screen, I'm still going to do the same test using fuel. As you can see, it is passing through it, so that means we can now reassemble the carburetor. If your fuel isn't disappearing through the screen, try soaking the screen again. Another tip, after getting the rocker arm back into place, press on it a few times and make sure it returns to its normal position. Once the pumping side is back into place, I'm going to replace the purge bulb. Now you can find these online for a few dollars. However, if you buy more than a couple, it'll be a better deal. Now these bulbs don't last forever, so if you buy a pack of 2, you'll probably end up using the other one in a few seasons anyway. One of the best questions I get happens to be about these metering diaphragms. The question is which one to get, as there's so many different ones on the online stores. What I tell them to do is remove theirs from their carburetor and compare it to the pics from the sellers. The most important part is the stem in the middle, as they're either long or short. This one happens to be the short version. Now this fuel system uses 2 different line sizes, so we're going to use Tygon line sized in 3/16 of an inch, which is the larger line, and the smaller line is 140 thousandths of an inch. Now originally they had the smaller line as the fuel filter line, but the filter I'm going to be using won't fit the smaller line, so that means we're going to swap them and use the larger line for the filter. It really doesn't seem to matter which line the filter is on. The carb will draw however much fuel it needs, and it doesn't seem to be affected by swapping the line sizes. Now after running the smaller line into the tank, cut the angle piece off and install the plastic splice, then pull on the other end of the line till it stops, then cut the line to where the carb will be sitting on the engine. After that, cut the larger line at an angle and install it just like the first line. The only difference is we'll be installing a fuel filter on this line, and we'll also leave the line long. Now make sure that when you put the filter back into the tank that it sits near the front of the tank. That way it'll pick up all the fuel it can when the blower is in use. Once the new fuel lines have been ran, we can now install the carburetor back onto the engine and reconnect the new fuel lines to it. The larger fuel filter line will connect to the lower brass port on the carb, and the smaller return line will connect to the brass port near the purge bulb. Now after putting some fresh fuel in the tank, we'll do a test prime on the fuel system and see which way the fuel flows through the lines. When pressing the purge bulb, fuel should come up from the larger line into the carburetor and fill the bulb. Then it should leave through the smaller line and back to the tank. As you can see, the fuel is flowing through the lines like they're supposed to. However, if fuel comes up through the return line first and not the other line, then you might have to swap the lines on the carb. Also, if fuel does not fill up the purge bulb, then the engine is unlikely to start and stay running. If that's the case, I would suggest replacing the carburetor. Now when it comes to adjusting the carburetor, the screw closer to the engine is the L screw, and it's for low engine speed fuel adjustment. The other screw closer to the air filter is the H screw, and it's for high engine speed fuel adjustment. Now after starting the engine, the tuning will be done in one single shot without editing, so you can see exactly what happens. Now since the engine runs with partial choke and wants to die off choke, I'm going to assume it wants more fuel. I'll start by turning the L screw counterclockwise about a half turn and the H screw about a quarter turn. That way the engine will get more fuel from the carburetor. So what just happened? Well, the engine didn't initially start, so after pulling the rope several times in full choke, I flooded the engine. I then moved the choke to the run position and it cleared the flood and started. However, every time I moved out of partial choke, it wanted to die. That meant the engine wasn't getting enough fuel. I then turned both screws counterclockwise to give the engine more fuel. This time it stayed running, but the throttle wasn't responding much, which meant it needed more fuel from the H screw. I then adjusted the H screw to find the max engine speed, and then turned it just a little bit more for extra fuel to keep the engine from running hot and burning up the engine. Another reason why this engine might not be starting is that the compression is too low. This typically happens when the oil-gas mix is low in oil, causing the engine to wear prematurely. The fix for this is to replace the ring, but most people would just buy a new blower instead. So my question is, was this blower worth fixing? In the end, I spent about $4 in parts and about 1 hour on this repair, but honestly, I don't think anyone would give me $40 for this blower, as I don't think there's much of a demand for it. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions, and I hope to see you in the next video.